And joining me now is Republican Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma. Senator Mullin, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me on, Kristen.
Well, thank you for being here. I want to start with former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who, of course, President-elect Trump, as we just said, announced this week was his pick for Attorney General. You have said you trust Mr. Trump's decision-making in naming Gaetz, but you have been critical of Gaetz as well. Here's a little bit of what you've had to say.
We had all seen the videos he was showing on the House floor that all of us had walked away of the girls that he had slept with. And he walked up to me as Chrissy Noem, now Governor Chrissy Noem, and he said, man, she's a fine, and you can put the B word in place there. This is the type of individual Matt Gaetz is.
So, Senator, you clearly have questions about Matt Gaetz's character, but do you believe that Matt Gaetz is qualified to serve as Attorney General?
You know, there's no question that Matt Gaetz and I have had our differences, and that's no secret. Moving forward, I do respect President Trump's the right to appoint these individuals, but underneath Article 2, Section 2, Congress has to advise and consent. And Matt Gaetz is going to go through the same scrutiny as every other individual, and I'm going to give him a fair shot just like every individual. And at the end of the day, the Senate has to confirm him. I do think it's a very, very tough role. I've got a tough situation that I've got to set my personal opinions, and they're really not opinions. I got to set my personal situation with Matt to the side and look at the facts. If he's qualified, he's qualified. Be quite frank, I didn't even know he was an attorney until after he was appointed Attorney General, and I had to do my research on him. And I know that's crazy because I served with him, but I just never did the dig to find out actually his actual degree, what it was in.
Well, and speaking of digging into his background, the House Ethics Committee was about to release the findings of its investigation into allegations of misconduct by former Congressman Gaetz. Of course, he abruptly resigned before that could happen. A number of your colleagues, including members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, have said they would like to see that report. Should the House Ethics Committee release that report, Senator?
Absolutely, and I believe the Senate should have access to that. Now, should it be released to the public or not? That's I guess that will be part of the negotiations, but that should be definitely part of our decision making. Once again, I go back to it in Article 2, Section 2 in the Constitution. The Senate has to advise and consent these individuals, and in that process, we're going to give Matt Gaetz the same chances we'll give all President Trump's nominees. And by the way, I do believe that President Trump has the ability to pick some really, really good people. You can see why he's been successful in business, why he was successful in running his campaign, because he surrounds himself with the right people. So I have no doubt that President Trump believes that Matt Gaetz is the right person to do the right job. But at the same time, the background of Matt Gaetz does matter, and what the decisions that the Senate makes has to be within our boundaries of the constitutional authority that we have, and we will do our due diligence there. And I'll say this: Matt will be treated the same as every nominee out there, from myself and every other senator out there.
And you say background matters. I want to ask you about his views. Here's a little bit of what Matt Gaetz had to say last year about the very law enforcement agencies that he is poised to be tapped to oversee. Take a look.
We either get this government back on our side, or we defund and get rid of, abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them, if they do not come to heel.
Senator, do you support getting rid of the FBI, the DOJ under any circumstances?
No, I actually agree with what Matt was saying there. As hard as that is for me to say that, I actually agree with him, because what he's saying is he's got to come to the side of the American people and quit playing politics. The DOJ and the FBI has been politicized. There's no question about it. We've seen what they've done to President Trump. We've seen the attacks that they continue to go after him with. The DOJ is 100% weaponized. You saw the FBI and the fake Russia hoax. You saw the FBI shielding the Biden family and shielding the laptop from the American people during the election. If they don't want to come back and do their job, and their job is to keep America safe, to watch over the America's freedom through DOJ, making sure the American justice system is running smoothly and leaving politics out of it. But they haven't lately. And if they don't want to come back and get focused on what the American people's mandate was for them, then we do need to revamp the system and say, hey, maybe we've got it wrong. So I don't disagree with what Matt was saying there.
Well, and worth noting, of course, Hunter Biden has now been convicted on federal charges. The charges that were brought against President-elect Trump were brought by individual grand juries.
We had to go through a process to get there.
Let me ask you broadly, though, do you support the president-elect telling his attorney general to prosecute, to go after people he considers to be his political enemies?
The president didn't say that. That's being taken completely out of context. And President Trump hasn't been the one that weaponized the DOJ to go after his political enemies. President Trump did not do that when he was in office the first 4 years. He could have clearly done that against the Clintons if he wanted to. He didn't. Who did weaponize the DOJ was the Biden administration. We saw them continuously going after President Trump, treating him completely different. Let's go think about the classified records that was kept at Mar-a-Lago versus the classified documents that was kept in the garage of Biden, and how the different reports read. It is no question they were treated different. Now, who has weaponized the politicals or the DOJ is the Democrats, and no one can deny what they did to President Trump with 4 years underneath Biden.
Senator, it's worth noting there's absolutely no evidence that President Biden had anything to do with the federal charges brought against President-elect Trump. But are you comfortable?
Garland was appointed by
with law enforcement agencies?
Or by President Biden, and there's no question that the White House was informed about what was happening.
But Senator, you have said we're too good of a country to have the Justice Department go after political opponents. Are you comfortable with the DOJ doing exactly what you're saying you oppose?
If the DOJ is willing to take a hard look at themselves and say, hey, we got it wrong, there's some leadership positions that have to change. The people that made these decisions have to go, and get the DOJ focused on what their priorities are supposed to be. And that's to be making sure the Constitution of the United States is equal for every person out there. And if the DOJ is willing to do that and capable of doing that, and they did it for decades, by the way, for decades. If they're able to get back and say, hey, we got it wrong and admit wrong, then hey, yeah, let's do it. I tell people all the time, I've never fired a single individual for making a mistake. I will fire you if you can't admit that you made a mistake. And the DOJ has made multiple mistakes, and so has the FBI.
All right. Well, and again, Senator, let me just ask you bottom line here. Have you decided at this point whether you're going to vote for Matt Gaetz?
Oh, absolutely not. I haven't made a decision for who I'm going to vote for with any one of these nominations. As I said, I'm going to treat everybody the same and do my constitutional duty, and that is to go through advise and consent. And that means background. That means we're going to be doing everything we can to verify the individuals, know who they are, and put them in the best place to succeed, to put America first. And I understand the American people. We have an agenda and a mandate from the American people, because President Trump won the popular vote and overwhelming electoral vote. And they want to have a new direction for this country, and we agree with that.
I want to ask you about some of these other picks. You're, of course, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which will hold confirmation hearings into Trump's pick for Defense Secretary. Fox News host Pete Hegseth, you said on Thursday you're absolutely planning to vote for him. But since then, allegations of sexual assault in 2017 have surfaced, including that he paid the accuser as part of a non-disclosure agreement, Senator. That's according to documents obtained by the Washington Post. Mr. Hegseth's attorney, we want to say, denied the allegations of misconduct. He was never charged. But do you think that this matter could sink Pete Hegseth's confirmation?
It could, but let me tell you about Pete. He's an individual that served 20 years in the service. Is an honorable discharged veteran who served as a combat individual that walked into Afghanistan and Iraq, has 2 Bronze Stars, highly decorated combat veteran that is a civilian today. He's a major, and he fits the role of Secretary of Defense. I think he's a good pick, but once again, as allegations come out, we'll figure out if, as the Senate moves forward with the advise and consent to the President of the United States and doing our constitutional duties, we'll figure out if he can get confirmed or not. And I do think that Pete's a good pick for this position.
And just to follow up with you, because you had said you absolutely plan to vote for him. Do you still absolutely plan to vote for him?
Well, I do. As of right now, I start with yes. But can I be moved off of that? I'm sure. Everybody starts at some point. Some people start at dead even. Some people start at a yes. Some people start at a no. But I started at a yes, and it's going to take some movement for me to move off of that.
Let's talk about President-elect Trump's pick for HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Of course, he has said he believes that no vaccine is safe and effective. You have been on the record defending the efficacy of vaccines. Are RFK's views on vaccines a deal breaker for you, Senator?
No, I absolutely appreciate Bobby Kennedy taking a hard look at the vaccines. There are some questions that had to be made, and I appreciate some of the scrutiny that's going through there. I think Bobby can answer all those. I've had multiple conversations with him. I've sat down and had long conversations with him, and I actually find the guy extremely intelligent when it comes to this stuff. And some of this stuff does raise a lot of questions. But I do got a question for you. The Democrats are spending so much time talking about the scrutiny of President Trump's picks, and yet did we spend this amount of time scrutinizing Biden's pick? I mean, we can talk about Rachel, the Assistant Secretary of HHS. I think that's a pretty controversial pick from whatever pronoun he or she decides to use. We talk about Sam, the Assistant Secretary or Executive underneath Secretary of Energy. And the individual was arrested multiple times for stealing luggage off of conveyor belts inside airports. And I didn't see this same type of scrutiny that the Democrats used on these individuals' picks. There's been a lot of picks. I mean, we can talk about Pete Buttigieg. Is he really qualified to be Department of Transportation? But I don't see the same people given the scrutiny here.
We scrutinize all of those picks robustly. But Senator, let me just go back to this, because you've been on the record saying that you do believe vaccines are safe and effective. You're not concerned about RFK Jr. overseeing the largest health agency in the land? I
have said that there's some positives to vaccinations. I've also questioned vaccines multiple times, and I think they should be questioned. For instance, why is America highest in autism? What is causing that? Is it our diet, or is it some of the stuff we're putting in our children's system? It used to be almost not even heard of. Then it went from 1 to 10,000, then to 1 to 5,000, 1 to 2,000. In some races right now, 1 out of every 36 kids by the age of 3 have developed some form of autism. What is causing that? And if it is the vaccines, there's nothing wrong with actually taking a hard look and finding that's what's causing it. Okay. Is it something else that we're putting in our systems? We do know we're not as healthy as we should be right now, and we're the most developed country in the world, so all things should be on the table. And if that's scrutinizing vaccinations, then that is exactly where we need to go.
Senator, I just have to say, no credible expert or study has shown a link between vaccines and autism. So I just want to be on the record with that. Very quickly,
exactly. But when we ask about the studies for the vaccines, Kristen, I know, but when we ask about the vaccines and the study that was done specific for autism, it's extremely vague. And in fact, there's not been a direct study on each individual vaccine if it has a possibility of causing it. They have an overall reaching view, and I've asked these questions because I sat on health in the House and on the Senate, and we have got almost no answers on that.
Again, there's just no scientific evidence for that. But very quickly, because we're almost out of time, of course, President-elect Trump has floated the idea of recess appointments. Would you vote to approve recess appointments? Is that something you would support?
Yeah, if it became the last option. It is very difficult to get there. Remember, underneath Article 2, Section 3, the president does have the right to call us into recess if we can't agree. And that means if we get bogged down and let's say Hakeem Jeffries in the House is holding up some of the Senate, or some of the, not the Senate confirmations, but some of the stuff that's going on in the House, not to do with confirmations, or if we deal with Chuck Schumer in the Senate with confirmations, the president does have the right to call us into recess. However, it's very difficult to get that done because in 2014, Obama did this. Republicans took him to court and underneath the Cannon case, and we actually won. So there's some cases out there that shows that this wouldn't be temporary. First of all, we'd have to be in recess for 10 days. Both houses would agree to be in recess for 10 days before the first appointment. The appointment would be temporary, meaning it would only be at least 2 years or until the next Congress goes in. And so we'd still have to go through the confirmation period anyway. So it'd be absolute last resort. But if that's what we have to do to get the confirmation through, then absolutely let's do it. But I would say that would be last option. Okay,
yep. And you talk about Hakeem Jeffries. We'll put this to him coming up in just a minute. But Senator, Markwayne Mullin, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.